Welcome back to Breakthrough Innovation, where we uncover what it really takes to lead change, create value, and build what's next. I'm JL Heather here with my co host, Preston Chandler. Together, we lead Centered, a firm that helps organizations navigate complexity, spark creativity, and unlock the full potential of their teams through innovation coaching and strategy. Today's guest brings sharp insight into the crossroads of tech, sales, venture, and culture. I'm excited to welcome Adam Overhiser, a systems thinker and sales strategist who's reimagining how AI leadership and organizational alignment play together. Adam has experience scaling sports analytics platforms to seven-figure revenue and advertising AI startups on go-to-market. Sorry, advising AI startups on go-to-market positioning and culture. He's built companies, challenged conventional thinking and venture capital, and helped clients bridge the gap between leverage and leadership. It's a pretty well rounded resume, Adam. I'm excited to dig in. Welcome to the show.
Ditto, welcome. Excited to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I think maybe one of the best places to start is around this conversation we were having about friction before we hit that record button. And you kind of talked about how friction inside organizations is actually a sign of health, not dysfunction. And I think both Preston and I will agree with that. But I'm curious, maybe expand on that a little bit and then give us some ways that leaders can tell the difference between constructive friction and toxic resistance.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I should start with how I even went into sales to begin with.
Right?
And I grew up on a fruit farm, so I was interacting with clients from like the day I could walk, and I was the oldest in a set of quadruplets. So there was a bunch of us
Oh,
running
wow.
around. So it made this cool culture dynamic that really helped scale my family's business into what it is today and provide for, a big family. So at first it probably looked like a curse to my family, but it quickly became a blessing. So that's when I went into Western Michigan University and got a sales and marketing degree. And that's ultimately why I just was used to sales and wanted to, figure out how to enhance that skill that I already developed. And quickly throughout a couple different sales jobs, I realized that it was really just an underlying passion for understanding human psychology and social dynamics, and sales really being the verbal sparring ground at which I could develop that. So that's really my segue into what I believe is this necessity of friction within an organization. So when I got my first job out of college in venture capital, it was really a blessing because I didn't know which industry I wanted to be married to. And I feel like a lot of people make that decision and just stick to it. But
Agree.
I'm very much the person that, wants to taste everything. Like when I go to a restaurant and there's a big menu, it's my biggest nightmare because I got to ask the waitress or waiter, like, what the best items on the menu are.
One of
Um,
everything.
Exactly. So I was able to really taste every industry, was working with founders from around the world, and quickly realized that this was developing an ability to spot gaps and holes wherever I went, whether it was a new city or a new company. It was just like, oh my gosh, like you see it right away. It's like this, you develop this foresight for, I guess, innovation or the holes within a ship that you're on,
Yep.
right? And you're trained to like patch those, or at least coach founders on how to patch them themselves or to be aware of them to begin with. So like my entire free time within that space and now is studying founders, studying, biographies, books, the greatest founders. One of my favorite podcasts is the Founders Podcast with David Senra, and he does such a great job of breaking down and condensing these extremely dense concepts of what it takes to start a business, be a founder, because it's really overwhelming. I mean, everyone I've met, there's so many different variables to be cognizant of, and you can't possibly be the best at everything, so you're forced to delegate. But in that delegation, one of the coolest, I believe, life forces of a company in an organization is this necessity of friction. Ray Dalio has this idea, and many others as well, of having an idea meritocracy. I really love how he articulates how he runs Bridgewater.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of flowing of not only best practices up and down the org, but also flowing friction up and down the org. What's not working, what's working. And the trickiest part about that is everyone within the organization, not everyone, but the majority of people, they like to wear a mask. I mean, this is true in life, but really true within organizations because you're trying to appease and appeal to move up the ladder, right? So, how does one do that while being transparent, spreading truth, friction, giving their insights, etc.? It's really tricky. And today it seems like it's often punished, right? You see it oftentimes punished because the people above you and the leaders and the managers and the execs, they want to protect their standing within the company, the reputation within the company, probably more than anyone because, right, like they've climbed up there and they want to stay up there, right? So when people beneath them are trying to spread truth, transparency, friction, they're like, oh my gosh, like this, if this gets out, if this moves up the value chain, I could look really bad, right? This could reflect as incompetence.
Yeah.
When really like it's just such a necessity. So I'll stop there, but
Well, and it's interesting. I think the leaders that feel that way, and I'm be curious to hear what you think here about this. The reason they feel that way is they've already created a culture where they can be threatened by a new idea rather than an open culture where new ideas are the norm. I feel like the leaders that are great that are over here saying like, let's make sure we hear from everyone. Hey, Preston, you haven't talked yet. What are your thoughts? Like, tell me more. The new ideas get out, they're heard early, and they're raised as part of the team's success versus the leaders on the other side that are like, no, 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 I am the source of success. I know all the things. If you have a great idea that I didn't have, that's a sign that I'm weak. So I think kind of almost what you're talking about, while friction is great, it exists always. Like it's always there. It's just whether or not you leverage it. It's more a difference in terms of leadership and culture than anything else.
right. Yeah, Steve Jobs has this like beautiful quote of rocks in a tumbler. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's just this idea that he got like this rock tumbler from his neighbor, and then you put the rocks in and you turn it on and they just tumble all night, and then you wake up and like they're just beautifully polished stones. I mean, I love to relate these complex ideas to just nature because like you see it everywhere and it makes so much sense, but they're not often things that you just are taught or learn unless you're like seeking that information out. And I feel like so often it takes almost like an ego to climb such a ladder. And then those are often the people that aren't looking for external sources of information or external sources of ideas to grow.
And I really like that analogy because it shows that friction, like the right type of and amount of friction is required to get the most out of people. I mean, from the rock tumbler, you're never going to get the shiny stones unless you push them against something that's harder. Like
Right.
you were just trying to wash them to shininess in water, it wouldn't happen.
It's this idea of like comfort and complacency, right? I mean, everyone talks about this in their daily life, right? Like you grow through what you go through. And if organizations are suppressing friction, suppressing, truth, transparency, like what are they really prioritizing or optimizing for?
Right?
Well, so we're talking a lot about the leadership side suppressing the positive friction. I'm curious from your experience, when does the positive friction turn toxic?
That's a really good question. A really, really, really good question. And I think it's the thing that the best leaders that are trying to optimize for friction is the balance. So first, you have to understand that first thing we talked about. And then to be a great leader, you have to learn how to balance friction that you're inviting, right? I mean, it's almost like chaos in a sense. Like you're almost inviting chaos and like it's your
Yeah.
job to keep the order.
Have you seen there's an interesting video from Heinrich Nyberg called it's the Spotify engineering culture. And in part of it, he talks about that balance of order and chaos. And he says, to your point, the leader has to be balanced and, if possible, lean slightly toward the chaos side. He's not saying all go all chaos, but that balance has to be, you have to allow for it to feel a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I read this book by Jordan Peterson, and it was called Chaos and Order. And I forget if that's the exact title, but that's like the ideas. And he talks about this all the time. And it's, I probably shouldn't get into that because he talks about like gender roles and different yin and yang and
He is a controversial figure for sure.
yeah, exactly. But it's interesting ideals. And in the sense, my entire life, like an entrepreneurial brain is, people talk about it all the time. Elon talks about it. It's like my mind is a storm. And I feel like a lot of people have brains like this, but they often run from them or conform or wall off the storm. And I found that for a while, I was like, am I an apathetic person? Like you hear this apathy, like I have all these ideas and that's ultimately why I got into venture capital. You know, I couldn't choose an industry right out of college. It was tough for me. And so it was perfect. It was the perfect storm because I grew comfortable in that storm, and I learned to like it, because that's where, like, if you sit in it long enough, like the best ideas come out of it. And I found that it's called dialectical thinking. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the term, but it's basically just balancing two truths rather than conforming to one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I feel
Well,
like
and
often,
opposing truths, not just any two truths, like two
hmm
opposing truths.
yes, exactly. So it's this idea that everything is a scale, right? And you have to balance them. So it goes back to our point about friction. It's like, I feel like managers that struggle with that idea don't have a scale. They just
Yeah.
have one truth that they're trying to push. And it's almost creating like this friction from not inviting the friction. And that's almost like, I feel, to answer your question, the more toxic alternative, right? Like that's where the
Yeah.
toxicity comes from, is this like resistance to flow of truth
But
and transparency.
the analogy I always use is it's like two football fans for opposing teams are sitting next to each other, and there's a flag on the play, and they saw exactly the same thing. They both watched the replay on the big screen. They heard the ref's explanation. They heard and saw everything exactly the same. Yet somehow this fan is sure their team is innocent, and this fan is sure the opposing team is guilty. It's this idea that two people can look at the exact same thing and take away two very different truths. And I think leaders who can accept that and work within that are the ones that can pull out the best value from their team and help their team realize the most potential.
hmm That's good. And that's where trust comes from, right?
Right.
Like it comes from this natural flow of not only like social dynamics, human nature, but it's like natural flow of how organizations are designed to operate.
Right.
And the
Because two
ones that,
football fans can argue about a call because their job doesn't depend on it.
yeah,
Right. They aren't going to get in trouble for having a good natured argument or
or
whatever. Right.
find a
But
bunch of money.
right, yeah. But in an organization, in a company, that kind of argument could go the wrong way. And that's where you kind of have to build this culture of safety that lets people
hmm
talk about the hard thing.
hmm
So
Another thing this
speaking of
reminds me of
culture, sorry, go ahead, Preston.
Another thing this reminds me of is just like the Agile Manifesto, where it talks about values in terms of this thing over that thing. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that one of them is not important. It's saying both are important, but we're going to value one of them slightly more. It's not that we completely lean to the other direction, but
Yeah.
that when push comes to shove, we have to lean one direction or the other. And
Yeah.
it's a careful balance.
When trust is high, information flows. When it's low, politics fill the gaps. I think
Yeah.
that I have this theory, right? And everything's a theory, apparently. It's this idea that what modern HR did really corrupted organizations in the sense that hiring became so automated. And AI read resumes, and it got so toxic to the point where everyone had to lie. And then they would have an interview with the people that had the best resumes. And then those people in the interview was basically a screening to be like, did they lie in the resume? Or are they telling the truth? And so what that system does is it optimizes for the best liars. And then you have a whole org full of them. And then there's no friction, there's no transparency, there's no truth. And then when one person sneaks between the cracks of that system and they're truthful, then they look like an outlier within the organization. But they're really the ones that you need, if that makes sense.
Great point.
Well, and hot take on HR aside, I don't disagree. I do think hiring practices are something that we could do better on. And I think it again goes back to that culture issue. Like, what is your culture? Is the culture one where you're trying to catch the liars? Like where you're assuming they're there and you just have to find them and catch them? Or is it a culture where you're bringing in the people who are ready to pitch in and help? I phrase it that way because I think those are almost the opposite ends of the spectrum. The liars are the ones that are there to hide and maybe fly under the radar or whatever. And the people who are there to just pitch in and help are the ones that feel, like their sense of value is recognized or is quantified by the value they create. It would be interesting to see like what would be a better way for HR to screen. That said, I do think that's probably a whole nother conversation, a whole nother
Yeah.
episode.
Yep. Well,
So
you're already seeing it, JL. I mean, a lot of companies are outsourcing third parties to do the work, to put in the work, to hire the people, and they hire from these agencies now
yep.
because they find better people. And they don't know what it is, but like to me, like with my theory, like I think that's why. And not only that, but like another, like not to get to bash HR, but like because a lot of companies like they haven't. That's like the last thing they build out, right? So that's almost like a startup critique more than anything. But now you like typically people within HR is like they haven't been in like a sales org or a team within the company,
Yeah.
so they're expected to hire to to optimize for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, without
And
Oh
any
it's a
yeah.
tricky thing
context,
to do.
they don't know what the team culture is like. They don't even know what good
Yeah.
sales or bad sales looks like. Yeah.
Right.
Visibility. They lack visibility, and that's not their
Well, and
fault.
inclusion. That said, Adam, we do have to start wrapping up. I really appreciate your time and your insights. For anyone who has questions about you about how they can integrate fiction into the way they run their organization, what's the best way for them to get into contact?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Me and my colleagues started a consultancy called SPRG, Special Projects Research Firm, and it's in the early stages, so we're figuring out where we want to iterate. A lot of people are coming to us for consulting, and they want to build out their AI systems to their org, and we're still not sure where we're going to take it yet, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach out to me. I'm often very active on there. Usually treat it like a personal journal for pattern recognition.
Awesome. Well,
Cool.
Adam, thank you again so much for everyone else who made it to the end of the episode with us. As always, while you're down there leaving that 5-star review, we'd love to hear about how friction is managed in your organization. Is it a force for good or a force for toxicity? Let us know. And then also, if you know anyone who's struggling with integrating AI or with friction in their organization, pass this episode on to them, introduce them to Adam, and share the wealth. That said, Adam, thank you once again. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time on Breakthrough Innovation.
Thanks for having me,
Thanks.
guys. Appreciate it.